Hi guys, this is the Crazy Counselor again, and today I want to dispel the myth that having bipolar disorder means that your mood changes from 1 minute to the next. Like we've all heard people say, that person's bipolar, or we even use the term bipolar to explain the weather sometimes, right? Especially if you live here in Georgia, because in Georgia the weather can literally be like raining one day and cold, and the next day it could be like 70 degrees. It's like, anyway, so I want to dispel the myth that someone who has bipolar disorder literally has a mood change within like minutes. That's not true. What actually qualifies the bipolar disorder diagnosis is a change in mood that goes from mania, which can be just rapid thoughts. It can be high energy, inability to sleep, maybe even grandiose thoughts. And this is something that's noticeable all the way to the other side of the spectrum, which is depression. That's where we get the irritability, sometimes the inability to sleep, the sadness, the feelings of worthlessness, feelings of helplessness or hopelessness, loss of energy, all of the above. And so those symptoms usually take place over, it could be weeks or even months. So someone who's been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, it does not mean that they're just walking around and at any given moment their attitude could change and boom, you're just like, wait, what happened? That's not true. That is a myth. And so, if you or anyone that you know has been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, let's just go ahead and throw that myth out so that we can know how to support someone who has bipolar disorder. And one of the things that we can do is to not assume that if they're having a bad day, then it's like, oh, it's just because they have bipolar disorder. We all have bad days. I have bad days, right? And so we have to allow people to be human. And when we have these myths, we don't allow people to be human. And so I just want to dispel that myth that someone with bipolar disorder, their mood changes from 1 minute to the other all day, every day, because that's not what happens. Again, periods of mania and periods of depression usually last for weeks and sometimes can last for months, okay? But again, with proper medication, as well as therapy and other supports, those changes in mood can be managed. Another myth that I want to dispel is that people who have been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, or we call it PTSD, are people who have gone to the military, people who have served the country in some capacity. And although a large part of the population of people who have PTSD, we hear the stories of how they've come back from a war or things of that nature and they've been diagnosed. There is also a large part of the population who has never been to war, has never even thought about joining the military, who has been diagnosed with PTSD. And so what that looks like is that anytime a person survives a trauma, it can be a childhood trauma, it can be any type of abuse, physical, emotional, and psychological, sexual, it can be a bad car accident, it could be someone breaking into their home, being held at gunpoint. Anytime someone experiences a situation where their ability to cope is superseded by the experience, then we call that a traumatic experience. That means that in that moment, it was so overwhelming that your brain went into fight or flight response because it felt that you were in a life-threatening situation and it needed to protect you. And so therefore, even after the traumatic situation is over, your brain still goes into fight or flight response even when there is no danger, right? And so this is where I always like to say, like, sometimes our brains like to protect us, and I'm like, don't do that, brain. Like, stop. You don't need to protect me. I'm not in any danger. But it doesn't work that way, because if your brain has experienced that, then it thinks, oh, I need to go into fight or flight. Like, I need to protect it. We need to be protected here. We need to flee the danger, right? So just because you have not gone to the military does not mean that you haven't experienced something traumatic, or that you can't or wouldn't be diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. And so if you're having nightmares, if you're having flashbacks, if you're having, if you find yourself being what we call hyper aroused, that means that everything, startles you. You're very easily startled. And your anxiety is high pertaining to a particular situation, I would definitely recommend reaching out to a professional, talking to someone who is trained in trauma therapy, or even if they're not trained specifically in trauma-informed therapy, any licensed counselor, social worker, or psychologist should be able to identify the signs and symptoms. If needed, give a proper diagnosis and a proper treatment regimen, okay? And so again, I just want to dispel the myth that, just because you didn't go to, you didn't serve in the military, that you can't be diagnosed with PTSD, or you can't have experienced a traumatic situation, because that certainly is not true. So this is the end of my broadcast on this particular subject. I hope that it was helpful. Please share with anyone that you think may benefit from this. If you have not already, please subscribe to the Crazy Counselor YouTube channel. I will be doing more and more videos, sharing information soon, and see you later.